the Biden administration leaves behind it a shambles in foreign policy.
Yeah.
Um, there is a war in Ukraine that is a forever war. Mr. Trump has promised to end it in 24 hours, but I don't think there's any Gordian knot to be cut in Ukraine. There are very complex issues there centering on initially the rights of minorities, Russian-speaking minorities, Hungarian-speaking minorities, Romanian-speaking minorities, whom ultranationalist Ukrainians sought to deprive of the right to use their own language to educate their children or communicate with local government. That set off a rebellion, which the Russians backed in the East. And that issue of minority rights remains unresolved, despite the annexation by Russia of 4 oblasts, 4 districts in
Mhm.
eastern and southern Ukraine. That's one issue. The second issue is, of course, where is the border between Russia and Ukraine? That has to be worked out between Ukraine and Russia.
Mhm.
Others cannot do that for them. And so there needs to be a negotiation. And Mr. Zelensky, who's the president, still unconstitutionally, but retains power as president in Kyiv, his term having run out, but he did not hold elections. So anyway, he is in power, and he has issued a decree
Mhm.
saying that there can be no negotiation with Russia. And one of the Russian demands is that he repeal that decree, and so that a negotiation can take place. And the third and a much larger question is, what is the relationship of Ukraine to European security? And
Mhm.
what is the architecture for European security? This all began in December 2021 when the Russians issued an ultimatum
Mhm.
demanding that all three of these issues be addressed. That is, the issue of minority rights in Ukraine, the issue of the border and how that should be handled, and the issue of European security architecture.
Mhm.
They were seeking an architecture for European security that would reassure them, but also reassure Western Europeans. And this remains on the table, but we have no negotiations going on. And the Russians are basically winning the war very decisively. And I don't think they want a ceasefire. They want a peace. So that is a mess, and it has distracted the United States. But we also have the distractions in West Asia, which we've been talking about: genocide in Gaza, ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, a war of invasion and annexation in Lebanon,
Mhm.
Israeli territorial expansion,
Yeah.
the issue of which way Syria is going to go, the future of Lebanon as a separate political entity, and so forth. And finally, as if this weren't enough, we are drifting slowly toward war in the Taiwan Strait. And there is no diplomacy. You originally proposed to talk about diplomacy on this program before things happened, and
Yeah.
we shifted to current events. Diplomacy is the best way of managing threats. It's cheap. It doesn't involve anybody dying for the most part,
Yeah.
and it can be decisive. But there is no diplomacy in any of these situations. The United States may not want to have Israel attack Iran as it proposes to do, or to be dragged into such a war, but we have no diplomatic contact to speak of with Iran. We're
Mhm.
not engaged in dialogue. The
Yeah.
agreement we reached to cap the Iranian nuclear program below the level of bomb building was repudiated by the previous Trump administration, and there's no understanding on that. In Ukraine, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has now been in office for 4 years. He has never once visited Moscow. The last time Sergei Lavrov, the very able Russian foreign minister, visited Washington was 5 years ago. There has been no dialogue. There have been, 10-minute or 5-minute encounters on the margins of international conferences, but these don't amount to anything.
Yeah.
And finally, there's no dialogue with China. There is two sides basically exchange combative talking points, but don't listen to each other. And nobody is really trying to solve any of the problems, the Taiwan issue, the issue of order in West Asia, or the issue of European security.
Mhm.
So Mr. Trump and his crew are going to have their work cut out for them. Whether they're up to the job or not is something we will see.